They are an end unto themselves. Their freedom is beautiful and their slavery is a horror. The bedrock principle of animal rights is that all living beings have the right to live their lives free from exploitation, victimization, and cruelty. This is a right that every being has. But how do we acknowledge this when it comes to non-human animals? So let's take a look at this. Every 30 minutes, more than 6 million animals are killed in slaughterhouses around the world. In the United States alone, over 10 billion land animals, 20 billion sea animals are killed for food every year. An additional 10 million die in laboratories. More than 3 million are killed for their skin and fur. It's estimated that more than 200 million animals are killed by hunters. That's 80 million animals every day. And yes, people suffer too. Some of us have been through wars. Some of us have survived natural disasters. Some of us have lost family members in one atrocity or another. But none of it can compare to what we, the human race, subject all other species on this planet to. Not the gas chambers in Auschwitz, not all of the world wars combined, not the genocides in Syria and other places. The sheer magnitude, the well-oiled systems we have developed, the unimaginable cruelty with which we raise, kill, and use every part of these billions of living beings, just so that you and I could please our taste buds, or wear a stylish jacket or bag, or shoes, or wash our hair with a brand new shampoo. It's inexcusable, and it's going on every day, every hour, and every moment. So this is why we're here today. This has to stop, and it will only stop with us.
Policy work for what they do for animals. Sanctuaries provide home for rescued victims of exploitation, and perhaps even more importantly, give the public a chance to get to know animals as individuals and change their hearts. Not everyone has the skills or resources or the stamina to care for a wide range of sick and injured and maybe dying animals. If that activism isn't for you, thank someone who provides sanctuary for what they do. Product developers, scientists, restaurateurs provide the supply to feed the growing demand for compassionate alternatives to animal exploitation. From creating delicious foods to developing educational alternatives to zoos and aquariums. This gives the public appealing choices that don't involve hurting animals. Not everyone has that kind of talent and innovation. If that's not the activism for you, take a moment to thank those who provide animal-friendly options for what they do. So clearly, no one practice of activism alone encompasses this entire movement. It's more important than ever that we recognize each other, support each other, as we work towards a common goal. When we find ourselves disagreeing with the tactics other activists might take, remember that disagreement doesn't have to equal disrespect. And time we spend combating each other within our movement is time wasted combating those who exploit the billions of animals each year. Finally, I'd like to address an ever-present threat facing the animal rights activists, and that's despair. In this calling, we make ourselves incredibly vulnerable to very real need. We bear witness to incredible suffering and unimaginable cruelty. We're surrounded by the apathetic response to the violence that we can't ignore. We watch friends, family, coworkers, and strangers casually participate in daily activities that we know are the result of brutality and death. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, and at times, we all understandably slip into a feeling of hopelessness. Cory Booker, who's the first vegan senator of the United States, has a quote, "Cynicism is the refuge of cowards." At times, of course, we're bound to feel pressing sadness and anger about what we see happening to the animals in this world. But if we allow that sadness and anger to define us and to cloud our outlook on the world, if we only believe the worst in others and feel no hope, then we're admitting that we're powerless to make any change. And I don't believe that. I know that I'm powerful, and I believe that each of you is as well. To remain effective, it's vital that we believe in our own power to create change. I manage a vegan grocery store, Vegan Haven, for those of you who haven't been there. And I'd like here to tell you that there's so much reason to have hope. Literally every single day, I watch people come in that have seen the documentary, or been handed a leaflet, or witnessed a presentation, or attended a class, or spoke with someone, and they've decided to go vegan. From where I stand, I find it impossible not to be hopeful. I've seen families go vegan after listening to what their teenage children have learned. I've seen couples in their 70s go vegan and become activists, leaving leaflets in the meat departments of grocery stores to educate others. I see people from all walks of life beaming with excitement to begin living a new lifestyle in accordance with their own values of compassion. And I would encourage any of you who are struggling with hopelessness to come spend some time at Vegan Haven, hang out anytime and just watch. You'll see how the tide is turning and that people are inherently good. In animal rights, decisive victories are few and far between, but that doesn't mean that progress isn't being made. Let's turn our sadness and anger into action. Let's empower ourselves to look for the good in others so that we can connect with that.
As vegan for 3.5 years. Animals are intelligent, gentle, kind, wonderful, beautiful creatures, and yet every year, over 56 billion farm animals are killed. In fact, if one person is unkind to an animal, it is considered to be cruelty. So where a lot of people are unkind to animals, especially in the name of commerce, cruelty is condemned. When large sums of money are at stake, will be defeated to last otherwise intelligent people, as quote by Ruth Harrison in 1920. Lots of animals are killed in the dairy and egg industry, butchering rodeos, animal testing labs, the bird industry, circuses, planetariums, and even deforestation methods. All of those industries are absent-mindedly and ruthlessly causing harm and killing many animals.
I'm definitely more comfortable in a bullhorn than with a microphone. Thank you for having me. I'm Amanda. I have been involved in the animal rights movement for over a decade now. I've been vegan for I think 11 years, and I was vegetarian for 16 years before that. I'm very lucky to get to share every day with a little rescue dog named Susanna, who reminds me every day of why everything we do for animals is so important. I see how she went from being on death row and a terrified little dog to now being lucky enough to get to enjoy every day, and that's what we do for all animals. As Doug mentioned, I was one of the organizers of the No New Animal Lab campaign. That was a campaign to try to stop the University of Washington from building a new underground animal lab. And that is just a few miles away from here at the UW Seattle campus. Unfortunately, they did end up building the lab. They call it the Animal Research and Care Facility, a terrible name for an underground torture chamber for animals. And so Seattle was ground zero for the No New Animal Lab campaign. They built this lab underground, and now they've put grass over the top of it. And inside the lab will be hundreds of primates. There will also be other animals like dogs, pigs, rabbits, and the lab is part of a 15-year expansion plan that the university has to keep expanding the number of animals that they have in labs, even as people around the world are recognizing that animals should not be in labs, not only because they just shouldn't be because they are animals that have an interest in living, but it's also more and more awareness of there being alternatives to animal testing and there being better ways to help humans and not needing to use animals. So the lab has been built, but part of the No New Animal Lab campaign wasn't just about stopping the lab, but it was about bringing the grassroots animal liberation movement back to life, which it did. We were able to see the biggest grassroots animal liberation campaign in over a decade in this country. Many people here I met through that campaign, and I know many of you were out in the streets for that campaign. We had marches of over 500 people marching through the streets in the University District with chants of No New Animal Lab echoing through the streets. We sued the University of Washington Regents successfully and changed the practices that they have for their meetings because they approved the lab through illegal means. We had days of action that had people in Seattle having protests at the same time as people in Portland and California and Florida and Chicago and even in Sweden and Finland and around the world. We had speaking tours that went across the U.S. We spoke throughout Europe. We were speaking in packed rooms in places like Finland and Spain. People wanting to know what we were doing here in the U.S. to stop this lab. There was a lockdown at the lab site where people literally locked themselves to construction equipment using their own bodies to stop construction on the lab for a day. There were other forms of direct action as well. There were home demos at people's houses, going directly to the doorsteps of the leadership involved in approving the lab and continuing to keep the construction going. There were protests at offices, at the university. There was a sit-in at the president of the university's office. Literally across the board, different tactics were being used. People were getting involved. People who hadn't been involved in activism in years were getting back involved. New people got involved. We saw new animal rights groups across the country start to be able to work on the campaign. And so, in so many ways, the campaign became this spark in the animal liberation movement, showing that as grassroots activists, we do have the power to create a global movement to work together to stop labs, to show the animals that we will work together and be there for them. And so now we're at this moment where, what do we do from here? In Seattle, I think that we should go look at the lab site. Go see that now it is a patch of grass. Literally, this lab is underground where animals are being tortured, and they put grass over the top of it. And that grass should be our reminder of how much the UW is trying to hide what's happening to the animals. They want to bury them underground and have people be able to sit on top of it and read books and study. And we should show the university that that's not what gets to happen. They intentionally built this lab underground because of animal rights activists. We received documents where you can see the university president talking about how it's going to be underground because of animal rights activists. And so we should take that as a bit of a challenge to expose what is happening to the animals and to remember what the animals are going through. Those animals are going to spend every day doing what they can to fight back, whether that means kicking, fighting, going insane for the conditions they're in. They are going to be fighting back, and so we have to be with them. And on a broader scale, they can be our reminder of all the animals that we have to be fighting for every day, and remembering that we're the ones with the power to do that. We can't look to governments and corporations to decide to change things for animals. We have to do it. It's the government and corporations that are going to criminalize activists and going to continue to exploit animals and profit off their bodies. So we have to do it and to remember that we have the power to. The New Animal Lab was just one example of how people around the world can come together to show how powerful we can be. The animal rights movement has a history of bringing corporations to their knees, of changing government policies, of people literally going into labs and fur farms and keeping animals out. And so the government and corporations are afraid of our movement, and we should take that as a compliment that they are, because this is a movement that has a diversity of tactics, everything from direct action to vegan education, and we should continue to push all of those different angles so that we can effectively save more animals.
Brothers, see, we are one in the same. And you left with your head was filled with flames, and we watched as your brains fell out through your teeth.
And then they cut it right when they finished.
Considering that all living beings on planet Earth came originally from the same source and follow the same evolution principles.
Considering that all living beings on planet Earth inhabit the same land, seas, and air, and therefore share them and their resources to live within and to live off of, comprising one ecological system.
Considering that all living beings possess the same basic needs to survive, to seek happiness, pleasure, and avoid pain, live comfortably, procreate, and create families and other social structures.
Considering that all living beings, as known to humankind, are sentient beings, and therefore can feel pain, pleasure, sensations, feelings, and emotions.
Considering that the human species is only one of millions of animal species and comprise a minute minority in numbers compared to the billions of animals living on the planet,
We hereby proclaim that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all beings are created equal and have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of their own happiness.
therefore all animals have the same natural right to exist as any other living being.
All animals have the right to be free, live their lives on their own terms as intended by nature.
All animals have the right to seek, sleep, be physically and psychologically comfortable, be mobile, healthy, safe, and fulfill all their natural and sensual needs. As such, all animals are free from hunger, thirst, malnutrition, and exhaustion, confinement against their will, bad treatment, abusive or cruel actions, pain, injury, and disease, fear and distress, and free to express their normal patterns of behavior.
All animals have the right to reproduce within Mother Nature's tendencies without the interference of human-imposed breeding and destruction of their populations. They have the right to live with their offspring, families, tribes, and communities, and maintain a natural social life. They have the right to live in their natural environment, grow children of natural species, and maintain a life that corresponds
It's
to
coming
their
over here. It's
natural
going out that
longevity.
door right now.
Animals are not the property or commodity of humans and are not theirs to use to their benefit or sustenance. Therefore, they are to be free from slavery, exploitation, oppression, victimization, brutality, abuse, and any other treatment that disregards their safety, own free will, and dignity. They should not be slaughtered for food, killed for their skins, experimented on, killed for religious purpose, used for forced labor, abused and killed for sport and entertainment, abused for commercial profit, hunted, prosecuted, or exterminated for human pleasure, need, or other ends.
Humans shall do whatever is within their means to protect all animals. Any animal who is dependent on a human has the right to proper sustenance and care and shall not be neglected, abandoned, or killed.
Animals who have died must be treated with respect and dignity as humans.
That's not right.
We call for the protection of these rights. They must be recognized and defended by law as human rights are. Any act which compromises the well-being or survival of an animal or species, or jeopardizes, contradicts, or deprives an animal or species of the rights listed above, should be deemed a crime and should be punished accordingly. In witness thereof, this declaration is hereby signed today, Sunday, June 4th, the 3rd National Animal Rights Day, City of Seattle, Washington, the United States of America.